Welcome back. Good to have you here. Let me ask you something. When you go through your morning routine, the kettle, the curtains, the small things you do without thinking in the same order every day, have you ever stopped and wondered if the routine itself somehow remembers? If it would just keep going in some form without you? Tonight's stories are the slow kind, the kind that move at the pace of ordinary life right up until the moment they don't. 7 accounts from people who noticed something off inside a routine, inside a system, inside a room or a route they were certain they knew, the kind of wrong that had already been running a while before anyone thought to check. If you're new here, welcome. Pull up a chair. If you're back, you know the ritual. Earbuds and lights low, get somewhere. Still, here we go. The kettle was already boiled. I want to be upfront that I'm not someone who does this. I don't tell stories like this at dinner parties. I don't make things up, and I don't talk myself into explanations that don't hold. I'm a project coordinator. I manage logistics for a living. I'm telling you all of that because what I'm about to describe is going to sound like someone who does exactly those things, and I've spent 2 years trying to decide whether to say it out loud. In October 3 years ago, my friend Donna asked me to look after her aunt's house in Perthshire for 6 weeks. The aunt, her name was Margaret, had died in August. Not dramatically, not unexpectedly. She was 81 and had a heart condition for years. She died in her own bed, in her own house, the way she'd always said she wanted to. Donna couldn't get up to sort the estate for another 2 months because of work, and she needed someone to keep an eye on the place. Run the heating, collect the post, make sure nothing went wrong with the pipes. I'd done house-sitting before. I was in between flats. It seemed fine. I drove up on a Tuesday. The house was a stone farmhouse about 3 miles from the nearest village, not dramatically remote, just rural in the way a lot of Perthshire is. A lane, a gate, a row of low-growing rowans along the front wall. She'd lived alone for 30 years, and her days had a structure that was almost architectural. The first week I was there, it was fine. I worked remotely, kept the heating on, collected the post. I kept to my own routines. I'm an early riser, usually up by 6, coffee on the hob, laptop open by 6:30. Keeping the living room largely untouched, because it felt like someone else's space, which it was. I was careful about that. The first thing I noticed was on the morning of day 5. I came downstairs at 6:10 and the kettle was already warm. Not boiling, not recently boiled, but still warm in the way it gets when it's been used within the last half hour or so. I stood there and touched the side of it and thought, did I do this? Did I come down in the night? I'd been sleeping badly since I arrived. New house, old radiators, unfamiliar dark. I decided I must have done it half asleep and forgotten. I filled it and boiled it again, and had my coffee and didn't think much more about it. Day 7. I came downstairs and the curtains in the front room were open. I always kept them closed. I'd arrived to find them open and I'd closed them within an hour of getting there because I found the lock view in the early morning slightly too much for me at that hour. Something about the way the light sat on it. I stood in the doorway of the front room and looked at the open curtains and thought, did I do this? I must have done this. I was in and out of that room a few times a day. I closed them again. The next morning they were open again. The next morning they were open again. I told myself it was the window mechanism. Old houses do things, latches slip. I found a way to wedge them. Day 9, the wicker chair in the corner by the fireplace, which I'd never touched, which was positioned facing the hearth in the way that seemed to be its permanent place, was facing the window. Someone had moved it to face the window, which would have given a clear line of sight to the lock, and also to the lane coming up from the road. I stopped in the doorway for quite a long time. I went through everything. I'd been in that room yesterday. I didn't move the chair. I would have had to step around it if I'd moved it. It wasn't a small chair. I went back through my movements in my memory, and there was no version of events where I'd moved that chair. But there it was, facing the window. I took a photograph of it and sent it to Donna. Did Margaret keep this chair facing the window? Donna replied 20 minutes later. Yes, always. She sat there and watched for the postman. "Did you move it?" I hadn't told her I'd found it by the fireplace. I'd been the one to put it there on my first day, because I'd assumed it had been left awkwardly, and the fireplace position looked more natural. That stopped me. I'd been the one who moved it. Something had put it back. I went through the house systematically. I checked every room, every window, every door. Everything was fine. Everything was exactly as it should be. I checked my own room, and it was untouched. I stood in the kitchen for a while and had a very deliberate, reasonable conversation with myself about old houses and suggestion, and the effect of sleeping badly in an unfamiliar place. I was projecting meaning onto coincidences. The chair had a weighted base, and I'd put it on uneven flagstones. The curtains had an old mechanism. I'd boiled the kettle in my sleep. I was almost convinced. Then on day 11 I came downstairs at 6, and there was a newspaper on the kitchen table, folded to the crossword, 3 letters filled in the top left corner. I stood and looked at it for a very long time. There was no newspaper delivery to the house. Donna had canceled Margaret's subscription when she died. I hadn't brought one. The nearest village with a newsagent was 3 miles away. I had not driven there the night before. I'd checked my phone. My car hadn't moved since Sunday. The 3 letters were in a neat, slightly cramped hand I didn't recognize. "Not mine," I called Donna immediately. "Does anyone have a key to this house besides you and me?" Donna said no. There were 2 keys in existence. She had hers and she'd couriered me. Mine, has anyone else been in since August? No, the solicitor had done 1 visit. The heating engineer. Both accompanied by Donna. I walked around the house again and checked every point of entry. Everything was locked. Every window, every door. I checked the back door twice. That night I set my phone up on the kitchen counter, propped against the fruit bowl, angled to cover the table and the front door. I went to bed. I did not sleep well. I came down at 6. The phone had recorded all night. I made myself a coffee before I sat down to watch it. I wanted to be calm. At 4:47 a.m., nothing moves in the frame. The door doesn't open. Nothing comes through the window. But the kettle switches on. I can see the little indicator light go from dark to red. It boils. It clicks off, and then, between 2 frames, there's no movement. Nothing carries it. But between 1 frame and the next, the newspaper is on the table. I went back and forward between those 2 frames 4 times. Nothing. In 1 frame the table is empty. In the next frame the paper is there. I watched it twice more and then I stopped. I didn't sleep in the house again after that. I drove to a bed and breakfast in the village and called Donna and told her I had a family issue and had to go. I didn't tell her the full truth until several months later. When I told her about the newspaper, the chair, the recording, Donna was very quiet. Then she said Margaret used to sit at that table every morning with the crossword. She'd do 3 or 4 letters before her coffee got cold, and then she'd come back to it after breakfast. I said, "I know." Donna said she'd heard Margaret say once to a previous house-sitter, a woman she'd trusted to look after the place when she had a hospital stay, "Thank you for keeping the routine." That was the exact phrase she used, as if the house needed a routine the way other things need water. As if without one, something would go wrong. That night I found, when I finally retrieved my things from the farmhouse, that someone had left a note under the kettle. I don't know when it was left. It was in a small, neat, slightly cramped hand. It said, "Thank you for keeping the routine." I had the handwriting looked at informally by a colleague's partner who works in documentation. She compared it to letters Donna found in Margaret's desk. Same writer. "Margaret died 8 weeks before I arrived. I don't house-sit alone anymore. It's not a rule I made formally. It's just a thing I stopped doing." The floor between 14 and 15, I moved into the building in Mapo when I was 28. 32 floors, underground parking. The usual elevator bank, 2 cars, standard panel, B1 through 32. I'd lived there for maybe 6 months before I noticed. The elevator sometimes stopped between floors 14 and 15. Not dramatically, not with a lurch. It would just pause, The door would open, a hallway identical to every other floor. Same pale gray carpet, same overhead fluorescent strip, same apartment doors running left and right, except the hallway was short. And every door had the same number on it. 14, not 14A and 14B and 14C. Just 14, all of them the same number. On every door, both sides. I asked my neighbor Mrs. Cho about it. She'd lived there for 11 years. She looked at me like I'd asked something slightly rude, then said there are 32 floors and a basement. You probably pressed the wrong button. I said I'd pressed 22. She said I probably hadn't. I let it go for a few weeks. It happened twice more. Same thing, pause. Doors open, the too short hallway. The 14 doors all numbered 14. I started paying attention in the elevator. I wasn't pressing anything wrong. One evening I was in the lift, alone when it stopped there. The doors opened, I was holding my keys. I did not get out, but I looked down the hallway, and it was the same as always. Gray carpet, fluorescents, all the 14s. And standing about halfway down facing me was a man in a dark suit carrying a briefcase. Business clothes, neat, no expression in particular. He looked directly at me the way you'd look at someone on a train when you're deciding whether their seat is taken. He said, going down, the doors slid shut. I looked at the panel. The button for my floor 22 was lit. I had not pressed it. My hands were full. I was the only person in the elevator. I asked 4 other residents about the floor. 2 hadn't noticed it. One said, don't ride the elevator after midnight. She didn't say why, and she didn't seem interested in explaining further. The 4th, a man who'd lived there 3 years, said, you leave after he asks you that, right? You don't answer. I said the doors closed before I could. He nodded slowly. He said, good, I moved out 4 months later for unrelated reasons, but I took the stairs every night after 11, and I never answered the question about going down, and I'm not actually sure those count as unrelated reasons. The prints were almost right. I've been a park ranger in northern Finland for 9 years, since I was 25. Before that, I worked trail maintenance in Lapland. I'm not given to overreaction. The forests up here do unusual things in winter, and you learn the difference between a thing that requires attention and a thing that merely looks wrong. This required attention. It was the 3rd week of December. I was on the Rasituntori route, a marked patrol trail I'd done maybe 200 times, doing a standard afternoon check of the wildlife cameras. Fresh snow, 3 days old. Visibility was good for that time of year. I was moving at my usual pace, about 4 kilometers per hour, taking camera memory cards and noting animal sign. Quiet work. I do it alone, always. I was about 7 kilometers in when I heard footsteps behind me. Not an animal. The rhythm was bipedal, 2 beats, even spacing, and they were matching my pace. Exactly when I slowed, they slowed. When I stopped, they stopped. I turned around. Nobody. The trail behind me was empty, but in the snow, clearly there were tracks, bipedal. Running parallel to my own prints about a meter to my right, I crouched down and looked at them. The stride length was approximately 97 centimeters. Mine is 73. The prints were roughly foot-shaped, heel, ball, toes, but the proportions were wrong. The forefoot was too wide and the toes were close to equal in length, which isn't right for a human foot. Not animal either. I've seen elk, wolverine, lynx, and several species of bird track in this terrain. This wasn't any of those. It was like something that had studied human bipedal movement very carefully and had almost got it right. I photographed the tracks thoroughly, 16 images, and noted the GPS coordinates. I radioed the station and reached my colleague Petrie. I described what I'd found. He said, angle of an elk trail can do strange things in fresh powder. I said, I know what an elk trail looks like, Petrie. He said, come back along the west route and we'll look at the images. I agreed. I continued my check, completed the camera circuit, and came back on the west route. I was not followed on the west route, or if I was, whatever it was quieter, because I didn't hear it. I got back to the station and Petrie checked his watch. He said, you've been out 4 hours and 11 minutes. I looked at my own watch. It said the same. I said, that's not right. He said, What time do you think it is? I told him what I genuinely believed it to be, a time that was 40 minutes after I'd left. He showed me the station clock. He showed me my departure log. I'd been gone 4 hours and 11 minutes. I had no account for the missing time. I wasn't cold. My core temperature felt consistent with a 40-minute walk. I wasn't hungry beyond what a 40-minute walk would explain. My camera card contained exactly the 16 images I'd taken, plus the 6 I'd taken on the west route. Nothing extra, nothing between. Just a smooth record of a normal patrol. Petrie looked at the photographs on my camera. He went through them carefully. He stopped on the last one, the final image in the sequence from the main trail. He zoomed in on the right-hand edge of the frame, which I had not particularly examined because it was the blurred margin of a landscape shot. He turned the camera screen toward me at the very edge of the image, partially out of frame. Ankle to mid-thigh was a leg, human-scaled, dark and distinct, partially obscured by a pine branch. I had photographed the tracks and I had not noticed anything beside me. The photograph was time-stamped 47 seconds before I had called Petrie. Petrie and I had been on the phone at that moment. I had been looking at the snow. I submitted the photographs and a full report. The images were examined. The leg in the final photograph was never identified. The patrol report was logged under unidentified sign and filed. I put in a request for a patrol partner the following week. I cited personal preference. It was approved without comment. I have not done a solo winter patrol since. Petrie has not mentioned the images again. We don't talk about the 4 hours. I still do the job. I'm still out in those forests 2 or 3 days a week. I still like the work. I just make sure someone knows exactly where I am and has a radio on, and I never stop to listen for footsteps behind me, because I'm genuinely not sure what I'd do if I heard them again. The stop. That was never there. I've been driving the Belo Horizonte to Montes Claros route since 1999, 200 and some times. Night run, mostly. You leave late. You hit the empty stretch north of Curvelo around 2 in the morning. You're in Montes Claros before dawn. I know that road the way I know my own hands. In March, about 4 years ago, I pulled into a roadside stop I'd been pulling into for years. Small concrete building, 3 plastic tables out front, overhead light, counter inside. I'd never asked who ran it. Some family, coffee, bread, sometimes soup. I poured myself a coffee, ate some bread, left 40 reais on the counter because there was no one to take it from me, and got back in the truck. 3 months later, I'm at a company dinner, sitting across from a driver named Rinaldo who runs a different route. Montes Claros back south. We're talking about the road, about the empty stretch, and Rinaldo says he pulled into this stop a while back. March, he thinks, lights on, coffee ready, bread on the counter. Nobody there. Same place. I said, yeah, that place. Whoever runs it must keep odd hours. Rinaldo said, what place? I said, the one at the kilometer marker, give or take on the empty stretch. Rinaldo said there was no stop there. I said, what do you mean? I've been stopping there for years. He said he'd driven that route going north before and there was nothing on that stretch. Never had been. I said he was thinking of a different stretch. He pulled out his route map. I pulled out mine. We compared. There was nothing on either map. Not a building, not a marker, nothing. It had always just been there when we needed it. I stopped other drivers over the next few weeks. 3 of them had been there. 1 hadn't. All 3 who had stopped could describe it identically. The concrete, the tables, the overhead light, the coffee that was always hot, the bread that was always under a cloth. One of the 3 was a woman who'd been running that route for 12 years and had been stopping there since 2015. None of us could say when exactly we'd first noticed it. It had always just been there when we needed it. It had always just been there when we needed it. The one who hadn't stopped there, a younger driver, been on the route a year, said, what does the sign say? None of us could remember a sign. We'd never thought to look. I drove that stretch again 2 weeks later in daylight, with my eyes on the right-hand margin the whole way. There was nothing there, concrete, brush, empty roadside. No building, no tables. No overhead light. I left 40 rayés on that counter. Whatever it was, it fed me 20 or 30 times over the years, and I never once went hungry on that drive. I still think about that. I also think about the fact that every one of us who stopped there always left money, without being asked, without being charged. We just felt, as Rinaldo later put it, like it wasn't right to leave without paying. I don't know what that means. I'm just telling you what happened. "47 messages I want to say first. I know how this sounds. I know how all of it sounds. I'm a practical person. I managed a dental practice for 11 years. I have a spreadsheet for my monthly budget, and I do not believe in most things that I'm about to describe believing in. I'm only telling this because my sister told me I had to eventually, and she's probably right. My mother died in January, 18 months ago. It wasn't sudden. She'd had a bad couple of years, but when it happened, it still felt sudden in the way those things always do. She'd lived in the same house in Youngstown for 31 years. Her house, her things, her particular way of keeping everything. I went to sort it out in March. It took me 3 full weekends. My sister came for the first one, and I did the second and third alone, which I regretted the moment I found the lockbox. It was in the false back of the wardrobe in her bedroom. She'd had a wardrobe built into the alcove sometime in the 90s, and it had a deep back panel that pulled away. If you pushed it right, my sister and I had known about it since we were kids. Our mother used birthday presents back there, empty by the time we were teenagers. I checked it mostly out of habit. The lockbox was metal, gray, about the size of a shoebox, unlocked. Inside was a thick white envelope, sealed, and a rubber band around it. I opened it. Inside pages. A lot of pages printed in my mother's typeface. She'd had the same printer for 15 years. I'd recognize the output anywhere, on white A4 sheets. Each page had a date at the top, a phone number, a timestamp, and then a block of text laid out like a transcript. I sat on her bedroom floor and went through them. 47 pages, 47 transcripts, spanning from March 2002 to the November before she died. Every one of them calls from the same number, 330-555-0187, our old landline. The one we had in the house when I was growing up, disconnected in 1999. I'll stop there because I know you need a second with that. She had 47 transcripts of voicemails from our old landline, a number that had not been active for 3 years before the first transcript was dated. I told myself, it's a recycled number, a coincidence. Phone companies reassign numbers all the time. I read the transcripts. They were warnings, not vague, not atmospheric, specific, dated, operational warnings. Don't drive on 193 the third Tuesday in August. First, I don't know who Lena is. I've never known anyone named Lena. I went back through memory. There was a pile-up on Route 193 on a Tuesday in August 2002. It made the local paper. Don't let the dog outside after 11 in February. Our dog went missing from the yard in February 2009. We never found him. Don't sign any papers this week without calling Lena first. I don't know who Lena is. I've never known anyone named Lena. First, I don't know who Lena is. I've never known anyone named Lena. But on the date of that transcript, 2011, there was, I checked with my sister later, a real estate issue my mother had been close to signing on that turned out badly for everyone else involved. She'd pulled out at the last minute, she'd told us, because something felt off. She didn't sign. She called someone first. We didn't know the name. The last transcript was dated 6 weeks before she died. It said, "Don't let her go to the attic alone. Please." I was in the bedroom. I was alone in the house. I looked up. The attic hatch in the hallway ceiling, the kind you pull down with a cord, was open. I had not touched it. I hadn't been near that hallway since I arrived. The hatch was hanging down with the folding ladder unextended, just the opening dark. I went up. I know. But I went up, nothing. Storage boxes, fiberglass insulation, a single pull light, cold, quiet boxes I recognized from years of looking at them at Christmas. Nothing wrong. I came back down and stood in the hallway breathing normally because I'm a practical person, and I had checked, and there was nothing. Then I read the last transcript again. It said, "Don't let her go to the attic alone." Not, "Don't go to the attic. Don't let her go alone." As in, she should have had someone with her. As in, whatever the warning was against, it wasn't about the attic itself. It was about being in the attic with no one who could see her. I called my sister from the hallway. I stayed on the phone while I folded the ladder back up and pushed the hatch closed. I didn't go back upstairs. I didn't finish that weekend. I sent a house clearance company to do the last 2 rooms, which cost more than I budgeted for, but I didn't go back. The house sold in June. I'd like to say I made sure someone in the clearance company took the lockbox, but I left it. I left it in the wardrobe, in the false back, in the dark. I keep thinking the right person will find it. I left it in the wardrobe, in the false back, in the dark. I keep thinking the right person will find it. I just keep not being sure that person is me. She was already at the desk. I'll preface this by saying that I'm a methodical person. I work for the Bureau of Meteorology. I have a science degree, a very boring personality according to 2 ex-partners, and absolutely no context within which to explain what I'm about to describe. In April, 2 years ago, I started a 90-day solo rotation on Macquarie Island, a research and weather monitoring station about halfway between Australia and Antarctica. I'd done 1 rotation there before, 4 years earlier. It's isolated, it's cold, it's quiet, and the work is straightforward. Maintain the automated instruments, log readings, transmit data back to base every 48 hours. You're alone, but you have satellite phone contact and a 2-way radio. It's remote, not inaccessible. A support vessel comes every 3 months. I arrived in April. By the end of the first week, I was settled into my routine. Instrument checks at 7:1500, data logging in between, meals, radio contact, sleep. The station itself is a compact prefabricated building, sleeping quarters, kitchen, a bathroom, and the main monitoring room where the equipment and the workstation are. Everything runs off a generator and a solar array, backed by battery storage. It's well designed. I find it comfortable. There's a particular kind of peace in knowing exactly what a day will look like. On day 23, I opened the monitoring log to enter my morning data and noticed something wrong in the previous night's entries. There was a 2-hour data block, time-stamped between 2:17 and 2:55 in the morning, logged under the operator identifier OPS2. I am the only operator. My identifier is OPS1. OPS2 doesn't exist. There are no other authorized users for this station's system. I went back through the log. OPS2 had first appeared on day 6, 17 days of entries. I hadn't noticed because I only reviewed the previous 12 hours each morning. The OPS2 blocks were all deep night entries, time-stamped while I was asleep. Every entry was accurate, not approximately accurate, precisely accurate. Not approximately accurate, precisely accurate. Same readings my sensors recorded, logged correctly, filed in the right fields. Whoever or whatever was generating those entries knew exactly what they were doing. I called base on the satellite phone. The technician on duty, his name was Yusuf, went quiet for a moment and then said it was most likely a software artifact, a ghost session from a previous rotation, creating logged entries with no corresponding user activity. He said he'd look into it and that I shouldn't worry. I said, "Yusuf, there were 17 days of entries before I noticed. Either the ghost is very consistent or someone is in here with me." He said he'd look into it. He called back 4 hours later to confirm there was no known cause and I should note any unusual physical signs, unlocked doors, displaced items, any evidence of access. I told him everything was locked. He said to keep him posted. I set up my laptop as a recording device. Webcam pointed at the workstation, running a time-lapse capture every 30 seconds from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. I'd done this kind of thing before in a different context. I used to monitor nest sites for a coastal survey project. It's simple and reliable. I reviewed 11 days of footage with nothing unusual. On day 34, the 12th night of recording, I found it. At 2:17 a.m., The exterior door to the monitoring room opened. I know that door, it's heavy, it's stiff, it makes a sound. In the footage, it opens cleanly. A figure enters. Female. My height. Wearing a dark blue weatherproof jacket. The same jacket I wear, standard issue, the one hanging on the hook by the door. She sat down at the workstation and started working. I watched her hands. She knew every control, every panel, every software interface. She opened the calibration panel, the one that requires a 3-step unlock I learned on my first rotation 4 years ago. Something I could do in my sleep, and adjusted 3 parameters that I had scheduled to adjust the following morning. She did it without slowing down. She did it without referring to any notes. She worked for 38 minutes, and then she stood up and left, and the door closed behind her, and at 2:56 a.m. the room was empty and quiet. I sat in the kitchen for a long time that morning. Then I checked my morning task list. Every item on it was done. I checked my log. I had noted them as complete, in my handwriting with the correct timestamps. I had no memory of doing any of them. My log said I'd done them at 2 a.m. The scheduled tasks were done. At 2 a.m. The scheduled tasks were done. My log said I did them. The footage says I didn't. I called Yusuf. I described the footage. I described the figure, the jacket, the 38 minutes. Yusuf went very quiet in the way that he had a habit of doing, and then said, "We're going to ask you something, and we need you to answer carefully. In the footage, is she wearing a name badge?" I pulled up the footage again. I hadn't looked at the badge. I zoomed in on the figure's chest. The badge on her jacket read my name. My photo. I called in a request for early extraction the following morning. Medical grounds, elevated stress indicators, isolation response, both true. Both also not the full story. The support vessel came 56 days early. The technician who came aboard to check the equipment asked if I'd noticed any issues with the OPS2 log entries. I said yes. He nodded and made a note and didn't say anything else. Before I left, I reviewed the footage one more time. I'd watched it many times by then. I was very familiar with it. I don't know why I zoomed in on the face. I'd never been able to see it clearly because the figure always sat with her back toward the camera. But at 2:17 a.m., the moment she entered, she passed briefly across the camera's angle. 1 second, maybe less. A partial profile. I zoomed in as far as the resolution allowed. The face was mine. Not a resemblance, my specific face. My jawline, my nose, the exact shape of my hairline. Everything right, except the expression. I've been afraid in that footage many times watching it. But whatever was sitting at my desk at 2 a.m. for 38 nights wasn't afraid. It wasn't curious. It wasn't blank. It was alert. The way something is alert when it's been waiting for a long time and has finally been given work to do. I still work for the Bureau. I requested mainland postings only, citing personal preference. That was approved without comment. I do accurate, careful, methodical work, the way I always have. I check my logs every morning, first thing, before anything else. I don't know why. I just want to know if the identifier changes. The window seat after dark. This happened when I was 16, at my grandmother's house in Nagano. And I'm 24 now, and I still don't sit in window seats after dark. That's probably enough of a summary, but I'll tell you the full version. My grandmother Fumiko has lived in the same house since before my mother was born. Old house, low ceilings, a garden that grew however it wanted. I stayed there every summer as a kid, and I'd stopped going as a teenager. The way you do. And this was my first time back in 3 years. Actually, on my second day there, I was sorting through a wicker sewing box on the shelf. I'd knocked it over reaching for something, and at the very bottom, under all the thread spools and the thimbles and a small dressmaking tape, there was a folded piece of paper. I opened it. I was sleeping in the spare room, the one with the big bay window and the wooden bench seat built into it. I used to sit there as a child and read. I was looking forward to it, actually. On my second day there, I was sorting through a wicker sewing box on the shelf. I'd knocked it over reaching for something, and at the very bottom, under all the thread spools and the thimbles and a small dressmaking tape, there was a folded piece of paper. I opened it. My grandmother's handwriting. I recognized it from birthday cards. Old paper, slightly yellowed. It said, "Do not use the window seat after it gets dark." I went to find her in the kitchen. I showed her the note. She looked at it for quite a long time. Then she said she hadn't written it. I said, "Grandma, this is your handwriting." She said, "Throw it away and don't sit there." I pushed a little. She said it again. I let it go. That night, sitting on the window seat with my book, I heard her come to the doorway behind me. I turned around. She was standing there very still, not like someone who'd just walked in, more like someone who'd been assessing a situation for a moment before speaking. She said, "Come to the kitchen. Right now." I said, "Why?" She crossed her arms. She said quietly, in the way of someone who is not frightened, but is stating something they know to be factual and terrible. "Because it is already sitting next to you." I looked to my right. The bench seat was empty. The window beside me was dark glass, reflecting the lamplit room back at itself. I was the only one there. I went to the kitchen. I slept on a futon on my grandmother's floor for the rest of the trip. She never explained further. I stopped asking because every time I asked, her expression did something I didn't want to see again. 3 years later, she died and the house went to my aunt. Before the clearance people came in, I asked my mother to check the sewing box. My mother called me the next afternoon, too. But when I went back for it, it was already gone. She said, "There's a note in here." I said, "Does it say don't use the window seat after dark?" Long pause. She said, "Yes." I asked if it could be a copy my grandmother made before she died. My mother said the paper is old, yellowed, same as you described. I asked her to throw it away. She said she would. I called her a week later and asked if she had. She said I meant to, but when I went back for it, it was already gone. That's all 7. Take a breath. The thing about these stories is that none of them end cleanly. Something followed people home. Not in the dramatic way, just in the way that mornings feel different now. Or they check the desk before they sit down. Or they take the stairs after a certain hour. Or they haven't gone back to that room. Small adjustments. The kind you make quietly and don't explain to anyone. If something in tonight's episode landed too close, leave it in the comments. I read them, come back when the hour gets late. Good night.